10 women who used image, spectacle, and sheer nerve as a weapon, and 10 stories about exactly what it cost them and what it won them. One of these women had a CIA file opened on her within days of speaking her mind. One was married to a man who kept a coffin in the basement as a threat. This is Inside the Pop, and this is the real history behind 10 women who broke every rule pop music had for them. Number 10, Chaka Khan, I Feel For You. 1984. Before she was one of the most powerful voices in funk and R&B, Chaka Khan was a 19-year-old who had already changed her own name and joined the Black Panther Party. Born Yvette Marie Stevens, she took on the name Chaka after becoming involved in the Panthers community organizing work in Chicago as a teenager, years before she ever joined the band Rufus. That same fearlessness carried directly onto the stage. Metallic bandeau tops, leather, and outfits built to command a room, at a time when most female singers in soul and funk were still expected to play it safe and demure. By the time her solo hit, I Feel For You, reached the top 5 on the American charts in 1984, she'd already sold tens of millions of records and helped define what a woman fronting a funk band could look and sound like. Loud, physical, and completely unapologetic about taking up space. She never softened the image to make anyone more comfortable. The confidence wasn't a costume choice. It was the same fearlessness she'd carried since she was a teenager, deciding her own name. Number 9, Patti Smith, Horses, 1975. In 1975, a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days walked onto the stage at CBGB on New York's Bowery, and the American underground music scene was never quite the same again. Patti Smith started as a poet, not a musician, and only began adding guitar to her spoken word readings because she found straight poetry performances boring. The combination, raw punk instrumentation behind a voice that could shift from a whisper to something closer to a revival preacher, was unlike anything the New York scene had encountered before. Her 2-month residency at CBGB with the band Television in early 1975 drew record label scouts from across the city, and when it came time to release her debut album, Horses, photographer Robert Mapplethorpe shot the cover. Smith in a plain white shirt, jacket slung over one shoulder, deliberately androgynous and unglamorous by the standards of the day. She never dressed for male approval and never fit neatly into any single box the industry tried to build for her. Too raw for the mainstream, too literary for straightforward punk, too unglamorous for pop. She simply kept doing exactly what she wanted, and the rest of the culture eventually caught up to her. Number 8, Sheena Easton, Wholesome 2, Sugar Walls, 1980 to 1985. In 1981, Sheena Easton was the picture of wholesome pop stardom, a young Scottish singer whose rise had been documented on a BBC series that made the entire country fall in love with her before she'd even had a hit. 3 years later, Prince wrote her a song called Sugar Walls, and everything about her public image shifted overnight. The song became one of the most controversial tracks of the decade, landing on the Parents Music Resource Center's infamous Filthy 15 list, alongside songs by Prince himself, Judas Priest, and Madonna. A list compiled by a group of politically connected mothers that eventually forced a U.S. Senate hearing on music censorship. Easton performed the song with the same easy smile she'd used on her wholesome early hits, which only made the contrast more unsettling to critics expecting her to stay in the box they built for her. She went on to record more music with Prince over the following years, cementing a reinvention that took her from the girl your grandmother approved of to an artist deliberately, unapologetically outside anyone's comfort zone. Number 7, Olivia Newton-John, From Sandy to Physical, 1978 to 1981.
I took you to an intimate restaurant.
The most dramatic image transformation in pop music didn't start on a stage. It started on a movie screen.
Tried to keep my hands on the table.
Olivia Newton-John had built her career on wholesome country pop ballads and a reputation clean enough to win multiple Grammy Awards before she played Cyndi in the 1978 film Grease. In the film's final scene, that image flipped entirely. Black leather pants sewn so tight she reportedly couldn't sit down between takes, an off-the-shoulder top and red heels. 3 years later, she released Physical, and the transformation became permanent. The song's suggestive lyrics and aerobics class imagery got it banned by radio stations in parts of the United States and South Africa, and the BBC initially refused to air it at all. None of that stopped it from spending 10 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, one of the longest runs of the entire era. She went from the most innocent image in pop to one of its most provocative reinventions, entirely on her own terms, and never seemed to look back. Number 6, Cyndi Lauper, She Bop in the Senate Hearing, 1984 to 1985. Cyndi Lauper built her early career on colorful, chaotic, deliberately mismatched fashion. And in 1985, that same fearless attitude landed her directly in the middle of a genuine U.S. Senate hearing on music censorship. Her song, She Bop, a playful, unmistakably suggestive hit about female self-pleasure, was placed on the Parents Music Resource Center's Filthy 15 list, a roster of songs the group's politically connected founders considered dangerous for young listeners. The controversy helped force a formal Senate hearing that September, where musicians including Frank Zappa and Dee Snider testified directly against the proposed music labeling system. Lauper herself later joked about the uproar, telling audiences that she'd apparently brought shame upon her family simply by writing a catchy song about something everybody already thought about privately. The PMRC never managed to get the song pulled from radio. If anything, the controversy only cemented Lauper's reputation as someone who was never going to dress, sound, or write songs the way anyone else expected her to. Mid-break. We're halfway through, and the next 5 stories include a record label calling a woman not commercially viable 23 separate times, a tour that began in genuine tragedy, and a first lady who ended up in tears at her own White House luncheon. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe, because number 1 involves a government agency that opened a file on a singer within days of her speaking her mind. Number 5, Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll, 1982. After Joan Jett's first band, the Runaways, collapsed in 1979, she recorded a solo debut album and brought it to every major record label she could find. 23 of them turned her down. Some told her, in plain language, that a woman fronting a rock band simply wasn't something audiences would buy. Rather than change course, Jett and her producer, Kenny Laguna, started their own label, Blackheart Records, pressing the album themselves and selling copies out of the trunk of a car after shows. When radio stations wouldn't play her music either, Jett reportedly called DJs personally, asking them to give the record just one spin. The song that came out of that stubbornness, I Love Rock and Roll, spent 7 weeks at number 1 in 1982 and sold more than 10 million copies worldwide. Performed night after night in the same head-to-toe black leather that became her permanent visual signature. Every label that turned her away had insisted women simply didn't sell rock records. Jett built an entire independent empire specifically to prove them wrong and never once softened the image to make the point more palatable. Number 4, Stevie Nicks, Rhiannon-era stage costume, 1975. When Stevie Nicks joined Fleetwood Mac in 1975, She was genuinely terrified of performing in front of large crowds. And her solution wasn't a vocal coach or a therapist. It was a costume. She called a designer named Margie Kent and handed her a stick figure drawing describing a look pulled straight out of Great Expectations. Something urchin-like, layered in raggedy chiffon, paired with velvet platform boots instead of heels she couldn't move comfortably in. Nix has said directly that the goal wasn't to look sexy for an audience. It was to build a uniform that let her hide in plain sight, sexy under 18 pounds of chiffon and lace, while nobody could actually see who she really was underneath it. During performances, she'd twirl in those sheer layers until the fabric seemed to float around her like smoke, and audiences would stop focused on the music entirely, just watching her move. Nix has said she designed the look specifically to last her until she was 60 years old. Decades later, she was still wearing a version of the exact same silhouette, proof that the costume was never about revealing anything. It was armor, built by a woman who understood exactly what she needed to survive the stage. Number 3, Kate Bush, The Tour of Life, 1979. In April of 1979, a 20-year-old from South London launched a concert tour so ambitious and so physically demanding that she wouldn't attempt another one for 35 years. The Tour of Life featured 17 costume changes, magic tricks, poetry readings, and elaborate choreography that turned every performance into something closer to theater than a standard rock concert. But the tour began in genuine tragedy. On the very first night in Poole, lighting director Bill Duffield fell 17 feet through an open panel in the stage flooring while checking the set after the show, and died from his injuries a week later. Bush reportedly considered canceling the entire tour. Instead, she pressed forward, later organizing a benefit concert to raise money for Duffield's family, held during the tour's final days in London. She performed the full 6-week run to overwhelming critical acclaim, then simply stopped touring altogether, not returning to a live stage for 35 years. Everyone who saw her that spring remembers exactly what they witnessed and exactly what it cost to make it happen. Number 2, Ronnie Spector and the Ronettes, Be My Baby, 1963. In 1963, 3 women from Spanish Harlem walked onto a stage in tight skirts, towering beehive hairstyles, and dark eyeliner, at a moment when most girl groups still performed in modest, matching gowns. The Ronettes, led by Ronnie Spector, made image as central to their sound as the music itself, and producer Phil Spector was reportedly so mesmerized that he signed them almost immediately. He also married Ronnie in 1968, and what followed, according to her own 1990 memoir, was years of genuine imprisonment. She described being kept inside his Beverly Hills mansion, behind barbed wire and guard dogs, having her shoes confiscated so she couldn't leave on her own, and being shown a gold coffin with a glass lid in the basement, which Spector reportedly told her was where she'd end up if she ever tried to leave him. Ronnie escaped in the early 1970s with her mother's help, eventually rebuilding her solo career and reclaiming her own story publicly, decades before Phil Spector was convicted of murder in a completely separate case in 2009. The image that made the Ronettes revolutionary, bold, unapologetic, in full command of a stage, existed alongside a private reality that nearly cost Ronnie everything. She spent the rest of her life making sure people knew both halves of that story. Number 1, Eartha Kitt, I Want to Be Evil, 1968.
I wanna be evil.
Eartha Kitt spent the 1950s and 60s doing something few entertainers of her era attempted, performing with total, unapologetic command of her own sensuality, becoming the first Black woman to play Catwoman on television, and refusing to shrink herself for anyone's comfort. That confidence eventually cost her almost an entire decade of her career over a single afternoon at the White House.
I wanna shoot pool. In the fiddle.
In January 1968, Kitt was invited to a luncheon hosted by First Lady Lady Bird Johnson, meant to discuss rising youth crime in America. When it was her turn to speak, Kitt directly connected that crime to the Vietnam War, telling the room that young people were being sent off to be killed and that their resulting anger and rebellion shouldn't surprise anyone. According to contemporary reporting, Lady Bird Johnson was moved to tears at her own event.
But more than that, I wanna be the best.
The backlash was immediate. Nightclub bookings across America were canceled almost overnight, and Kitt later learned that the U.S. Secret Service had requested a file on her from the CIA the very next day, examining her activities and associations. She spent years unable to find steady work in her own country, eventually relocating to Europe, where she continued performing to standing ovations for nearly a decade before finally returning to American audiences.
As you know.
She never publicly apologized and never softened the statement that ended her domestic career. Decades later, she was invited back to the same White House by a different president, proof that the nerve which cost her everything eventually became exactly what she was remembered for.